A decorated foreign officer demanded the impossible, "Salute me, soldier." But the Royal Guard's silent response turned the entire courtyard and the world on its head. This wasn't just a standoff, it was a lesson in respect, tradition, and the unbreakable code that stood for centuries. What would you have done? Obeyed a stranger, or stood by your honor? Now, before we reveal the full story, first hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. Now, without further ado, let's get into it. The summer sun blazed down on Buckingham Palace, turning the iron railings into hot bars of blackened steel that glistened like a ceremonial sword in the afternoon light. Tourists pressed against the gates, their cameras at the ready, capturing every angle of a place that had stood through centuries of tradition. The air shimmered with heat, thick enough to taste, carrying the tang of sun-baked stone and a faint whiff of exhaust from the tour buses idling at the curb. 100 languages tangled together in the air, French, German, Italian, Mandarin, woven through the excited chatter of children perched on their parents' shoulders, eager for a glimpse of the guards in red. Amid the clamor and heat, Lance Corporal David Hartley stood at his post like a silent sentinel, his ceremonial uniform immaculate even beneath the weight of the afternoon sun. Scarlet tunic pressed to perfection, white leather belt gleaming with the pride of centuries, tall black bearskin hat casting a shadow over his eyes. His face, composed and unwavering, revealed nothing of the sweat trickling down the nape of his neck or the memory of his father's voice echoing from years past. Remember, David, it's not just a uniform you wear. It's history, it's service, it's a promise. At 27, Hartley had already stood at his post through enough seasons to know the rhythm of the day. The changing of the guard, the occasional dignitary arrival, the curious tourists with their endless questions. He had learned to endure the heat, the cold, the rain, and the well-meaning but often disrespectful jibes from those who saw him as little more than a photo opportunity. But he bore it all with a quiet pride, his posture as unyielding as the centuries-old stones beneath his polished boots. Today felt different, though. Word had come through the ranks that an international military delegation would be arriving, something about a ceremony at Horse Guards Parade and a scheduled tour of the palace grounds. Rumors buzzed among the guards like restless bees. A general from Eastern Europe, an officer of some repute, known for his blunt manner and strict discipline. Hartley had no reason to expect any encounter, but the tension in the air was undeniable, a taut string ready to snap at the slightest provocation. The palace gates, polished to a mirror shine, reflected the sea of onlookers. Children waved miniature Union Jacks, their parents trying to corral them into the best position for a photograph. A street performer's violin floated somewhere down the mall, its melody weaving through the noise, barely audible but somehow dignified. Amidst all of it, Hartley remained still, eyes fixed ahead, the very embodiment of a tradition that demanded more than words. It demanded presence, a presence that would soon be tested in ways he could not yet imagine. The low growl of a powerful engine rolled through the summer haze, turning heads as a sleek black sedan glided to a halt at the palace gates. Chrome trim gleamed in the sunlight, and small flags fluttered on the hood. Insignia that marked the car as official, carrying a dignitary whose presence would shift the entire atmosphere of the forecourt. From behind the iron rails, tourists pressed forward, phones aloft, eager to capture every detail. A hush spread through the crowd, broken only by the clicking of camera shutters and the murmur of speculation. A high-ranking officer, they whispered, a general or colonel from overseas. Some children squealed in delight, while their parents shushed them with a mixture of awe and polite deference. The rear door opened with smooth, practiced precision, and out stepped Colonel Viktor Sokolov, a man whose very presence seemed to challenge the air around him. Mid-50s, his uniform bristled with medals and crisp lines that spoke of decades in service. His posture radiated the kind of authority that had been honed in classrooms, war rooms, and perhaps battlefields too, though the medals on his chest offered no explanation beyond their silent gleam. Sokolov surveyed the scene with a practiced eye. Blue-gray irises that missed nothing, from the tight formations of the guards at their posts to the shifting clusters of tourists eager for spectacle. He carried himself with a kind of restless energy, every movement precise and intentional, yet tinged with impatience, as if the world never moved quite fast enough for his liking. A small entourage followed in his wake, 2 aides in matching uniforms, eyes darting nervously, as though any misstep might summon his displeasure. They carried clipboards, ceremonial folders, and a sense of collective unease that contrasted starkly with the colonel's iron composure. Sokolov's gaze fixed on Lance Corporal David Hartley as he approached the guard post, his boots clicking on the forecourt's ancient stones. He paused, studying the young soldier with the scrutiny of a man used to inspecting troops. His expression revealed nothing, no nod of respect, no hint of a smile, only a cold, appraising stare that might have belonged to a stone monument. Hartley felt the weight of that gaze but refused to acknowledge it. He'd stood through enough dignitary visits to know that respect was shown in silence, not in the breaking of protocol. His eyes remained forward, his posture rigid, the ceremonial musket at his side like a symbol of a duty that transcended any one man's authority. Sokolov stepped closer, crossing the invisible line that separated the public from the ceremonial guard. The tourists held their breath, phones trembling in eager hands. A few exchanged glances, sensing the tension without fully understanding its source. The colonel's lips curved into a tight, measured smile that never reached his eyes. A smile honed for cameras and diplomatic receptions, but utterly devoid of warmth. He turned briefly to his entourage and muttered something in his native tongue, the words sharp and clipped. One of the aides scribbled a note, the pen trembling slightly. Sokolov's eyes then returned to Hartley, scrutinizing every detail of his uniform, his posture, the sweat that beaded at his temples but never broke his stoic expression. For a moment, it seemed as if Sokolov might simply pass by, a dignitary acknowledging the ritual of the guard's presence without disrupting it. But there was a flicker of something in his eyes, curiosity perhaps, or challenge, that suggested otherwise. He shifted his weight forward, boots angled toward Hartley, a question forming at the edge of his smile. The sun glinted off his metals, and his shadow stretched long across the ancient stones. The tourists waited, breath held, cameras at the ready. Hartley felt the scrutiny, but held his ground, the weight of centuries of duty pressing at his back. A confrontation loomed, silent but inevitable, like a drumbeat beneath the summer heat. And in that breathless pause, the forecourt seemed to shrink, drawing the world's attention to one man's post and another man's expectations. Colonel Viktor Sokolov paused just a pace in front of Lance Corporal David Hartley. His eyes narrowed with the practiced scrutiny of a man who'd inspected more than a few honor guards in his career. He studied every detail, the crisp crease in Hartley's scarlet tunic, the gleaming white of his belt, the tall black bearskin that cast a shadow over his stoic features. The colonel's lips pressed into a thin line that might have been approval or disdain. "So," Sokolov said finally, his voice carrying the sharpness of command, "you are one of the Queen's guards." He spoke in clear English, though his accent shaped the words with a precision that sounded almost surgical. "I have heard about your, discipline." Hartley remained motionless, eyes fixed forward, every muscle trained to resist reaction. His orders were clear, no response, no movement, no engagement. Only silence and presence. That was the duty. Sokolov's eyes narrowed further, studying the lack of reaction like a puzzle he was determined to solve. He shifted slightly, adjusting the line of his uniform's gold braid, as if he were on a parade ground. "Do you salute your superiors here?" he asked, the question rolling off his tongue with a practiced edge. Hartley felt the question like a stone dropped into a still pond. His training told him everything. Ceremonial guards did not salute unless ordered by an officer of their own regiment. Foreign dignitaries, no matter how decorated, did not hold that authority. Still, he remained perfectly still, eyes forward, posture unbroken. Sokolov's lips twisted into a cold smile. He turned to his entourage, uttering something in his own language that made one of the aides stifle a nervous laugh. Then he turned back to Hartley, his eyes alight with the glint of challenge. "I am your superior by rank," Sokolov announced, his voice rising just enough to draw the attention of the nearest tourists. Phones tilted toward him, lenses capturing every detail. "Salute me, soldier." A hush rippled through the immediate crowd. Parents lifted their children higher. Some tourists lowered their cameras, unsure whether to film or to watch. Even the street performer's violin seemed to fade in the heavy air. Hartley's heartbeat quickened, but his breathing remained the same steady rhythm drilled into him through months of training. His orders were clear: no engagement unless ordered, no movement unless commanded. But the weight of the colonel's words pressed on him like a hand on his chest. Sokolov stepped forward, invading the invisible line between guard and observer. His boots clicked sharply on the stone, punctuating each word with the authority of a man used to obedience. He leaned in close, his voice low but cutting like a knife. "Are you deaf or just too proud to follow orders from a real officer?" he hissed, the words laced with an edge of disdain that dripped onto the forecourt like spilled oil. A flicker of anger ignited deep in Hartley's chest, a small, controlled flame that flared but did not consume. He'd trained for this moment, for provocations that demanded composure above all else. He let the flame burn behind his eyes, but kept his posture unbroken, his face an unyielding mask of duty. Sokolov's eyes roved over Hartley's medals, regimental insignia, ceremonial pins, searching for some sign of weakness. Finding none, he shifted his stance and repeated, more forcefully this time, "I said, salute me, soldier. That is an order." Hartley's training held him steady. The uniform he wore was more than fabric. It was the embodiment of centuries of tradition, a symbol that demanded respect, not just for the man wearing it, but for the history that had shaped it. To break that protocol for a foreign officer's whim would be to betray that legacy. The air around them thickened. Tourists watched, eyes wide and silent, some filming, others frozen in a kind of collective anticipation. A few exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether they were witnessing a breach of decorum or a test of resolve. Hartley's jaw tightened, though his eyes remained fixed ahead. The sun pressed down like a furnace, sweat pooled at his collar, but he would not move. Not for this man, not for anyone who demanded respect rather than earned it. The colonel's aide shifted uneasily, casting a glance at his superior as if to say, "Enough." But Sokolov either didn't see or didn't care. His voice rose again, loud enough for the crowd to hear, each word sharpened to a point. "Do you know who I am, soldier? I have commanded battalions that would crush this entire palace underfoot. I have earned salutes from generals. I demand it now. You will show respect." The word respect hung in the air like a challenge, a word Hartley knew well, but one that meant something different in his world. Here, respect was earned by conduct, not demanded by rank. Hartley's disciplined breathing and focus remained unbroken. But deep within, the flame that had been lit by Sokolov's taunts now glowed with a steady, quiet power. A power that would find its voice in a way that no command could suppress. A single bead of sweat trickled down Hartley's cheek, cutting through the perfect stillness of his posture. Yet he made no move to wipe it away. His eyes remained fixed forward, the stoic mask of ceremonial duty unchanged even as the colonel's words hung in the heavy air between them. But inside, beneath the bearskin and scarlet uniform, a storm was building. Not a storm of panic or fear, but of quiet, contained defiance. A reminder that his uniform did not belong to any foreign officer's whim. That the respect he carried came not from rank alone, but from the centuries of tradition that ran like blood through the veins of every guardsman who had stood on this very forecourt. Colonel Sokolov's face had darkened with impatience, his jaw set like stone. He shifted his stance, his polished boots creaking softly on the ancient paving. His eyes raked over Hartley's medals once more, a row of ceremonial pins that bore witness to years of service and sacrifice, though their meaning would be lost on a man who measured respect only in forced obedience. And then, in a voice as sharp as a bayonet's edge, Sokolov barked the demand again. "You will salute me, soldier. That is an order." It was in that moment, when the weight of centuries pressed down and the eyes of the crowd pressed in, that Hartley did something no one expected. He moved, but not to obey, and not to submit. It was the smallest motion, a flicker in the eyes, a tightening of the jaw, the subtle but unmistakable shift of a man preparing to speak. The crowd, holding its collective breath, watched as if time itself had paused to witness what would come next. Hartley's voice emerged, low, steady, carrying the unmistakable calm of a man who had stood watch in rain and sleet and heat, who had known the loneliness of guard duty and the pride of service. "With respect, sir," he said, each word precise, deliberate, "I do not answer to foreign command. I serve the crown." His words hung in the air, as unyielding as the iron railings behind him. It was not defiance in the way the colonel might have expected. No shouting, no disrespect. Just a simple, immovable truth delivered in the quiet dignity that had always defined the red-coated guard. Sokolov's face tightened, a flush of color rising from his collar to his cheeks. For a man used to instant obedience, the refusal was a slap delivered in perfect ceremonial stillness. His eyes darted to the crowd, noticing the phones raised, the hushed reverence that had replaced the earlier curiosity. The colonel's authority, so absolute moments before, now trembled under the weight of that one steady voice. The colonel's age shifted uncomfortably, eyes flickering between his superior and the stoic guard. One of the tourists, an elderly woman with a Union Jack pin on her lapel, lowered her phone and watched with the solemnity of a witness at a sacred ritual. Sokolov took another step forward, closing the distance until he was mere inches from Hartley's face. His breath, hot and sharp, brushed against the guard's cheek. "You will salute me," he demanded, his voice low but laced with a venom that dared Hartley to refuse him. Hartley did not flinch. His breathing remained steady, the rise and fall of his chest a testament to the training that taught him to master fear, to stand unbroken even in the face of aggression. His eyes remained fixed, focused on the middle distance, where tradition lived, where the memory of every guard before him stood silent and unwavering. "I will not," Hartley replied, his tone unchanged. "My duty is to stand guard, to remain silent, and to protect these grounds. That is what my uniform means." It was not defiance for the sake of pride, it was the fulfillment of a promise made in training halls and on parade grounds, forged in sweat and sacrifice, handed down by every man who had ever carried the red and gold into the heart of the capital. It was the unspoken pact that a guardsman served not for himself, but for the dignity of the post he held. A nearby palace staff member, his cap slightly askew from the summer heat, stepped forward hesitantly, his hands raised in a silent plea to de-escalate the situation. "Colonel," he began, his voice uncertain, "perhaps it's best if we—" But Hartley's stillness, his unbreakable calm, held the moment in place like a pause in a solemn ceremony. His quiet strength seemed to command even the air, silencing any impulse to interfere. Sokolov's entourage shifted uneasily, their eyes darting around, as if seeking an exit from the tension that had trapped them in this tableau of pride and protocol. Some of them looked to their colonel, others to the crowd, each one sensing that they had crossed a line that respect itself would not allow them to recross. The tourists who had gathered, so eager for a spectacle, so quick to lift their phones, now held them at their sides. There was no laughter now, no jeering, only a hush of understanding that something important was happening, something that went beyond the pageantry of the uniform and the medals. Hartley's expression remained unchanged, but the set of his shoulders, the quiet fire in his eyes, spoke volumes. He stood not for himself, but for the uniform he wore, for the tradition he upheld, for the respect that could not be demanded, only earned. In that moment, when one man's voice stood unbroken against another's demand, the crowd saw not just a guard, but a living embodiment of an unspoken code, a code that said respect was not given by rank alone, but by the measure of a man's conduct. The flame that had been lit by Sokolov's challenge now burned bright and steady, casting its light on every bystander, every camera, every curious eye. And in that glow, the true weight of tradition revealed itself, not as a chain that bound the guard, but as a shield that protected the dignity of service. Hartley's voice, calm and resolute, had spoken for every guard who had ever stood a post. And in that silence that followed, a silence deeper than the summer heat, his duty had been fulfilled. Colonel Sokolov's eyes burned with a mix of disbelief and rage, his face a portrait of someone who had never been challenged in public, let alone by a guard whose entire job seemed, in his mind, to be ceremonial. For a moment, his lips parted, and his jaw trembled with the threat of a retort, but no words came. The authority that had filled his voice moments before now faltered in the air, replaced by a silence that felt as sharp as any blade. Hartley remained at his post, motionless, eyes fixed on the middle distance. His jaw was set, the sweat on his temple a quiet testament to the heat and the tension that pressed down on the forecourt. But his posture spoke louder than any words, unyielding, disciplined, unbreakable. A hush had fallen over the crowd, as if the very air itself was waiting to see what would happen next. The tourists who had once jostled and joked now stood still, their phones half lowered, eyes wide with a respect they hadn't realized they'd come to feel. Even the children, who had moments before waved Union Jacks and shouted for photos, seemed to sense that something important was happening, something bigger than a tourist attraction. Sokolov's mouth worked soundlessly, his eyes darting from Hartley to the staff member who had tried to intervene earlier. The staffer had wisely stepped back, hands folded, eyes down, unwilling to interrupt the moment. One of Sokolov's aides shifted from foot to foot, clearly uncomfortable, his eyes on the ground as if it might open and swallow him whole. "In my country," Sokolov finally spat, his voice trembling with a fury he could no longer contain, "soldiers know respect, they obey." His accent made the words sound like a threat, each syllable clipped and harsh, slicing through the warm afternoon like cold steel. Hartley's eyes remained fixed, his posture unchanged. But when he spoke, his voice carried a quiet strength that reached beyond protocol, a strength that belonged to every man who had stood at that post before him. "Here," he said, his tone calm but unwavering, "respect is earned by conduct, not demanded by rank." The words fell into the silence like a stone into water, sending ripples through the crowd that spread and deepened. A murmur rose, soft at first, then growing, a sound that felt like the stirring of a collective conscience. Tourists who had come for photos now saw something else, a man who stood not just for himself, but for something bigger, for duty, for honor, for a code that no foreign officer could bend to his will. Sokolov's face darkened, his eyes darting over the sea of faces that now watched him with an intensity he hadn't expected. What had begun as a casual show of authority had turned into a trial by witness, every phone a judge, every child a jury. His authority, so absolute a moment before, now felt brittle, like ice too thin to stand on. A figure stepped forward from the crowd, a man in his late 60s, wearing a battered beret and a jacket with the medals of an older generation. His bearing spoke of years in uniform, though the lines on his face spoke of even harder battles fought in silence. His eyes met Sokolov's with a calm that came only from experience. "Young man's taught me more about respect in 5 minutes than you have in your whole speech," the veteran said quietly, his voice carrying in the hush like a hymn. The words were neither loud nor harsh, but they cut deeper than any shout. A ripple of agreement moved through the onlookers. A mother with a toddler on her hip nodded solemnly. A young couple, tourists from somewhere far away, exchanged glances that said they'd come for a show, but had stayed for a lesson. Even the children seemed to understand. Some intangible truth had been laid bare, a reminder that tradition and dignity were not just costumes and ceremony, but living things that demanded respect. Sokolov's jaw clenched, his face pale beneath the brim of his cap. He looked at his aide, who shook his head almost imperceptibly as if to say, "Enough. We've lost this one." The colonel's eyes returned to Hartley, searching for some crack in the armor, some sign of doubt or regret. But there was nothing, only that same steady, unwavering gaze, the quiet defiance of a man who knew that sometimes the greatest strength was not in the shout, but in the silence. Sokolov stiffened, his medals glinting in the sun, and muttered something in his native tongue, a string of clipped words that only his aides would understand. Then, with a sharp turn of his heel, he signaled his entourage and began to walk away, his boots pounding the stones with a rhythm that felt more like retreat than command. The tourists watched his retreat, some with a slow clap that rose and fell like a respectful tide. Others simply stood, heads bowed slightly, as if marking a passing. Phones lowered, eyes met. Strangers sharing a moment that felt inexplicably like history. Hartley remained at his post, eyes forward, posture perfect. But beneath the tall black bearskin and the weight of his uniform, a subtle shift had taken place. A reminder that respect, once earned, carried its own authority, an authority that no rank, no medal, no barked order could ever command. Colonel Sokolov's departure left a hush that seemed to hang over the forecourt like a delicate mist. The click of his polished boots faded into the distance, drowned by the soft hum of conversation as tourists slowly came back to themselves. Some looked at each other with an unspoken question. Had they just witnessed a confrontation or something far more meaningful? Lance Corporal David Hartley remained at his post, still as stone, eyes fixed on the middle distance. His posture had not shifted, his ceremonial musket still cradled against his side in perfect regulation. Yet, beneath the uniform, the slow exhale that slipped from his chest was nearly imperceptible, a silent release of tension that had been held like a drawn bowstring. A soft applause broke out, no more than a handful of hesitant claps that quickly faded, as if even the onlookers felt the need to maintain the dignity of the moment. Most simply watched with a quiet reverence, their phones lowered, heads slightly bowed in a gesture that felt more appropriate than any cheer. A palace official in a dark suit approached from the shaded archway, his steps measured, his expression one of restrained pride. He paused a few feet from Hartley, eyes scanning the crowd before settling on the young guard's steady profile. With a small nod, so subtle it might have gone unnoticed, he spoke in a voice pitched just for Hartley. "Well held, Lance Corporal," the official said quietly. "Protocol demands a steady post. Today, you've reminded us why." He gave the faintest smile, a mark of approval that carried more weight than any medal. Hartley remained motionless, but inside he felt a spark of something deeper than pride, an echo of every drill session, every cold dawn on parade ground, every moment spent learning the value of stillness. He'd served his duty not with force, but with presence, and today, presence had been enough. Near the rope barrier, a small girl clutched her father's hand, her eyes wide with wonder. She wore a dress the color of summer skies, and in her free hand she held a small Union Jack that drooped in the heat. She tugged at her father's sleeve, her voice soft but insistent. "Daddy," she asked, her words carrying in the hush, "why didn't the soldier salute that man?" The father crouched down, his voice low and thoughtful as he met his daughter's gaze. "Because, love, he was showing respect in the way only a true guard can. Sometimes, standing still and holding your ground is the strongest salute there is." The girl nodded solemnly, as if she'd just learned something more important than any school lesson. She looked back at Hartley with a newfound respect in her eyes, a respect born not of spectacle, but of understanding. Hartley felt her gaze, even if he couldn't acknowledge it. He felt the shift in the crowd, a sense that they too had come to see the man beneath the uniform, the quiet dignity that no order could command. He'd stood silent while a man of rank had demanded submission, and in that silence, he'd spoken more clearly than any shout. The crowd began to disperse, drawn away by the lure of the palace gates and the promise of afternoon tea. But there was a hush that lingered, a hush that spoke of something left behind in the space between the stones, a mark of respect that would not wash away with the next summer rain. A young couple, tourists from abroad, walked past the guard post, their eyes lingering on Hartley's stoic figure. "That was incredible," the woman whispered to her companion. "I've never seen anyone stand so strong without saying a word." Her partner nodded, his tone reverent. He didn't need to shout, he just stood, and that was enough. Hartley's eyes remained forward, the weight of his ceremonial hat pressing down like the burden of every guard who had stood there before him. He carried that burden willingly, because it wasn't just a job or a uniform or a pageant for the cameras. It was a promise to hold the line of tradition, to honor the unspoken code that demanded strength without arrogance, respect without fear. From somewhere behind him, the palace staffer who had tried to intervene earlier watched with quiet pride. "Well done, son," he murmured, the words meant only for himself. Well done indeed. As the afternoon sun climbed higher, a breeze stirred the air, carrying with it the scent of cut grass and the distant hum of the city beyond the gates. Hartley let it wash over him, the sounds of London's heartbeat mingling with the knowledge that today he had stood not just for the crown, but for something deeper, a respect that no foreign command could take from him. His eyes remained on the middle distance, posture unwavering, a silent testament to the tradition he embodied. And though he would remain at that post for the rest of his shift, unmoving, unreadable, something fundamental had changed in the space between the stones. For in that moment, when the crowd had watched one man stand against another's command, they had seen the difference between authority and respect. And in the hush that followed, they had learned a lesson that would outlast any uniform, that sometimes the strongest voice in the world is the one that refuses to shout. Hartley shifted his weight almost imperceptibly, settling back into the perfect stillness that was his duty. His heart beat steady, his mind calm. The uniform had taught him that presence was its own power, and today it had spoken volumes. Have you ever seen a moment where silence spoke louder than orders? What does respect mean to you? Obedience or integrity? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one and love hearing your perspectives on what makes these stories matter. And if this story moved you, if it reminded you that true strength sometimes means standing still when others demand you move, give it a like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon so you never miss a single story about the incredible men and women behind these uniforms. Share this video with someone who could use a reminder that real honor can't be demanded. It's earned by the way you carry yourself every day. And while you're here, check out the other videos appearing on your screen. We'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place, with another story that proves respect always has its own voice.